Oblivion is incredible. That's what I thought I'd be opening this video with, but unfortunately, it's not true, at least not to me. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim has always been one of my favorite games of all time. When I first played it in middle school, I fell in love with its incredible atmosphere, captivating quest lines, and amazing music. I vividly remember spending hours upon hours playing it every night after school during the winter, losing myself in its world that managed to feel so mature and immersive compared to other games I had grown up on. Following my unforgettable experiences with Skyrim, my search for more games that could replicate its magic led me to learn about Oblivion, which seemingly had its own reputation as a timeless masterpiece. I was convinced the 2006 classic was a game I absolutely had to get around to at some point. I just didn't know when that would be and felt slightly apprehensive about doing so due to the game's rather dated nature. However, when it was announced that Oblivion had been remastered by Virtuous Games and Bethesda this year, I was absolutely elated as I knew this would be the perfect time to finally dive into the beloved RPG. I think it's important to emphasize just how high my expectations were for Oblivion, and maybe that was my primary mistake. If I had gone into this game with different expectations and had a greater tolerance for some of its more dated aspects, perhaps I would have had a better time with it. The problem is, I went into Oblivion thinking that this would be the next Skyrim for me, with a world and atmosphere that I would become lost in for countless hours. Unfortunately though, that didn't happen. While I started off enjoying the game, the more and more hours I played, the more feelings of boredom and frustration started to creep in. To me, the game's so-called charm felt more like annoying jank. Its world seemed hollow and repetitive, and its main quest was mediocre at best. Obviously, I understand this may not be a popular video, as Oblivion is one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. If you're unfamiliar with my videos, I try to be as level-headed as possible when analyzing why I have particular feelings about a game, but I also always remain honest when delivering my opinion. I'm not trying to make this video to get a reaction out of people by trashing their favorite game. Instead, I want to use this to try and analyze why Oblivion fell slightly flat for me, at least compared to Skyrim. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed a good amount of my time with Oblivion, and I can absolutely see why people love this game, especially when factoring in the nostalgia many have for it. If that's you, I'm just asking that you try and see my perspective as someone who's not the biggest RPG enthusiast playing this nearly 20-year-old game for the first time in 2025. Just like you may have nostalgia for Oblivion, I have immense nostalgia for Skyrim, and it's that same nostalgia that excessively inflated my expectations for Oblivion to the point that it was never going to live up to them. I love many aspects of Skyrim, but the thing that initially captivated me the most about the game was undoubtedly its incredible atmosphere. I've never played a game with a world that feels like Skyrim's does. It somehow manages to be so mature and believable, yet also magical. I recently made a video about great open world design where I gushed over the effectiveness of its atmosphere, so you should check that out if that sounds interesting. The point is, the world of Skyrim will always be special to me in the way that it provides a sense of home that many of us long to return to. My hope was that Oblivion would somehow be able to replicate this in its own way. While I didn't gel with the game's world as much as I did in Skyrim's, I still think its atmosphere is one of the better parts of the game. Whereas Skyrim is a land that is much more dark fantasy-esque with a more oppressive, mature tone throughout, Cyrodiil feels a lot more magical and takes much more of a light fantasy approach than I was expecting. Walking through the world while light peeks through the trees of its lush forests feels like something from a fantasy storybook. Even the snowy Jarl Mountains to the north, which border the province of Skyrim, feel much less desolate or treacherous compared to any mountains in that game. I think Cyrodiil is a pretty solid fantasy setting. However, I definitely prefer the darker, more bleak feeling presented by Skyrim's daunting mountains, vast tundras and endless snowfall. Also, for some reason that I can't quite explain, I think Oblivion's atmosphere just feels somewhat bland and lifeless compared to Skyrim's richer, more authentic world, which kept me from achieving the level of immersion I had hoped. Part of this could be because of the towns, which I think are the defining areas of both of these games. I absolutely loved getting lost in each of Skyrim's different cities for the first time because of just how interesting they were to explore, as well as for their unique atmospheres. Sadly, I didn't find the towns of Cyrodiil to be quite as varied or engaging. Don't get me wrong, it's not like these cities are bad by any means. They are still much better than the copy-pasted settlements of most modern open-world games, and I still had a lot of fun exploring them. Each has relatively unique architecture and some defining quests that give them enough variety, but I just don't think cities like Coral, Bruma, Bravel, or Cheydinhal stack up to the memorability and intrigue of Solitude, Whiterun, Riften, Markarth, or Windhelm, at least for me. All of Oblivion's towns feel like pretty textbook medieval cities without much of the flair that I loved in Skyrim settlements. The Imperial City in particular was a massive disappointment. Before I visited it, I was always intrigued when I would look out over the map and see this massive, magnificent metropolis looming in the distance. However, when I finally got there, I was incredibly disappointed to see that it felt like an array of several bland, boxed-in areas separated by loading screens rather than a massive, sprawling city. I've seen split opinions online, with some people really preferring the towns in Oblivion, while others much rather would spend their time in those of Skyrim. While I still think they are pretty enjoyable to explore here, I fall into the latter camp. The last thing I want to touch on in terms of Oblivion's atmosphere is its music. I absolutely love Skyrim's soundtrack and listen to it quite often at night, whether that's while studying or editing videos. It's one of my favorites in any open world game. Oblivion's music, while not being able to match the nostalgia I have for Skyrim's, is still really great, which makes sense as it's the same composer. The game's soundtrack definitely takes a more whimsical tone to match the feel of the world. Walking through Cyrodiil while a magical piece of music kicks in is a pretty cool feeling, and I will definitely be adding some of these tracks to my playlist. In particular, I really appreciated songs like Reign of the Septums, which is a great rendition of the Elder Scrolls main theme. I also like Harvest Dawn or All's Well, which are peaceful classics. And then perhaps my two favorites, Wings of Kinnereth and Glory of Cyrodiil, each of which evokes the magical feelings that make this world so endearing. And that's probably my favorite aspect of Oblivion. It provides a sense of magic that feels straight from a fantasy novel. While I do prefer Skyrim's darker tone, more desolate landscapes, and distinct, memorable towns, I still think this game's atmosphere is pretty solid. My real problems with Oblivion start to arise when actually spending time engaging with the gameplay mechanics out in the world. Skyrim definitely has its fair share of jank, but I don't think any of that could have prepared me for just how jarring some of Oblivion's more dated aspects often feel. I'm not going to sit here and complain about elements like the combat because Skyrim set the bar pretty low in that regard. Both games involve a very rudimentary system of sort of just trading blows with your enemy and seeing whose health runs out first. I did like that Oblivion seemed to place a bigger emphasis on magic with a greater variety of spells. Both games also function pretty similarly in their armor and weapons. However, the main difference here is that Oblivion involves gear durability, which is sort of annoying to deal with. It's small, tedious things like this that I didn't experience in Skyrim that just feel unnecessarily frustrating here. One of my biggest issues with Oblivion is that the gameplay requires much more grinding since you have so many skills to manage to keep up with the level of enemies. I remember several times when I'd be trying to complete a side quest or fight an enemy to get a highly coveted weapon. However, I would either be completely overpowered by a high level foe or swarmed by several enemies at once, forcing me to leave the endeavor for later. I hate all forms of level gating and forced grinding in games, and this is no exception. Also, speaking of enemies, they follow you everywhere and it absolutely infuriates me. I remember a quest I was doing where I had to go rescue a painter inside of some magical painting. Inside of this painting are a few trolls that you must defeat, one of which I didn't kill. That troll managed to follow me all the way through this paint realm, somehow transported itself out of the painting, and then followed me through this guy's house, out his door, and all the way through town until me and some guards took care of it. Like, genuinely, why? Stuff like this happens all the time in Oblivion, and it makes me crash out. Other gameplay annoyances include the fact that you have to sleep every time you level up if you want to distribute your attribute points, rather than just being able to access a section of the menu. I kept forgetting about this, meaning I would have to sleep like 5 times in a row just to level up my attributes. Also, the potions in this game suck. Can I say that? I'm really glad I have 100 random potions, yet somehow not a single one is a healing potion when I need it. I'm kind of just rambling at this point, and if you're a big RPG fan, you probably think I sound stupid. My issues aren't with many of the larger gameplay systems here, but rather these little elements that just feel so much less streamlined than anything I was used to in Skyrim. I guess this just sort of proves I really am a sky baby, as they say, and I'm not really built for more hardcore RPGs. I think I could get around some of these issues if the world of Oblivion wasn't so underwhelming to explore. I'm not talking about the artistic design, I'm talking about the actual content here. Whether it's traveling the roads and coming across a unique NPC encounter, finding a small new settlement with quests to do, or delving into one of the many dungeons that all feel handcrafted, I could spend countless hours just wandering the world of Skyrim without getting bored. I hoped Oblivion would provide that same feeling, yet it just doesn't. Handcrafted unique encounters are rare in this world. Instead, most of Oblivion's exploration consists of dozens and dozens of copy-pasted tedious dungeons. When I first exited the sewers and came across one of these, I was like, okay, this is sort of cool. Then I walked probably 50 meters and came across another, and then another, and then another. I quickly realized these were the only activities to really engage with in the world. They do follow slightly different themes, with some being ancient Aelid ruins or decrepit caves or abandoned forts, and even Oblivion gates, which are another subject entirely. However, none of them are memorable, consisting of the same copy-pasted rooms, and just have tons of enemies and meaningless chests scattered about to create some illusion of engaging content. Also, the fact that you have to run all the way back to the beginning of every dungeon once you complete it is just plain annoying. Because of these quality of life issues, I frankly would never enter any of these dungeons unless a quest required it, which is saying something as I usually go out of my way to do optional activities in open world games. I'm not sitting here acting like Skyrim's dungeons don't get repetitive at times, but they feel way more handcrafted and engaging than anything in Oblivion. The game's world genuinely seems so empty and uninteresting to engage with because there's nothing to do in it aside from these copy-pasted dungeons. And no, plants to pick or little enemies don't count. Where's the NPCs with little dynamic interactions out in the world that I love from Bethesda games? Somehow, even Ubisoft open worlds feel more interesting than Oblivion's, which is something I didn't ever expect to come out of my mouth. I will say, my complaints with the world design don't extend to the towns. Each of them feels very handcrafted with a lot of interesting buildings that can all be explored. It's just those damn dungeons. Maybe if you enjoy these grindy, repetitive activities, then you like exploring the world of Oblivion. I don't know. For me, it's a landscape that just feels like an incredibly bland artificial space, consisting solely of a bunch of copy-pasted, annoying dungeons. Unfortunately, this offsets most of the immersion that the game's relatively solid atmosphere manages to build for me. It's frustrations like this that I just wasn't prepared to deal with coming into this game. Skyrim is by no means revolutionary in terms of its gameplay and the content it offers in its world, yet it feels like a night and day difference from Oblivion. Maybe my expectations were off. Maybe I'm just not built for RPGs. Or maybe I'm delusional, because I really thought I would fall in love with this game. When looking at the consensus online, the one area of Oblivion that seemed to be considered universally superior to Skyrim is its quests. I loved Skyrim's various quest lines for the mature stories they told, as well as the impactful choices they allowed the player to make, so I was incredibly excited to see just how good Oblivion's quest lines really were. However, I felt like once again, there were some little frustrations that held me back from truly enjoying any of these to the extent I thought I would. I'll start this section by discussing the main story questline. So, I actually have a confession to make. I've never beaten Skyrim's main story, even after playing the game for hundreds of hours. As a result, I really wasn't expecting too much of Oblivion in this regard, as I prefer to just spend countless hours getting lost in these games' more interesting optional quest lines instead. Even so, I still think in terms of what I played of each game's story, I prefer what Skyrim has to offer. From the beginning, I just really wasn't invested in much of Oblivion's story, partially due to its introduction. Skyrim's opening is incredibly iconic, and is even sort of a running joke at this point.
Finally awake.
But I think it's way more effective at really getting you invested in its world. From its opening scene, the game sets a dark, mature tone as you ride on a carriage through a thick fog to your supposed execution. Skyrim then further reinforces the brutality of this harsh world by making you watch one character killed by arrows in his tracks, while another gets beheaded right in front of you. On top of this, the game does a great job of staging the key conflict between the Empire and the Stormcloaks in an intriguing manner from the beginning, before you are ultimately forced to choose between the two factions, introducing the importance of choice and consequence in this world. Also, the opening is just an awesome spectacle, as you must escape Helgen while a massive dragon burns it to the ground.
You're doing great! Torolf! Gods! Everyone get back!
I could dive way deeper into why Skyrim's opening is so effective, but I'll save that for another video. The main point is, I just didn't find Oblivion's opening to be nearly as engaging. Similar to Skyrim, you start as a prisoner of the Empire, albeit this time locked in a cell, when all of a sudden the Emperor and his guards appear and open your cell door, saying that they must enter through a secret passage to escape a plot on the Emperor's life. At this moment, you learn that the Emperor has seen you in his dreams, and that you will soon serve some role in helping Tamriel that he doesn't reveal to you. You then must follow him and his guards through a series of tunnels until you inevitably witness his assassination at the hands of the mythic Dawn.
Let's get this up, stranger!
I guess this opening does sort of introduce you to the game's main threat, that being this mysterious cult, but not only does it lack the spectacle and intrigue of Skyrim's opening, I think it just does a poor job of really establishing a defining tone for the rest of the game. And that's my main issue with Oblivion's main story. It just feels kind of uninspired and basic without much of a distinguishable vibe or clear message. You're simply some hero trying to fight a generic demonic threat against the Empire. There's not much more to it than that. I don't know, I guess you could say the same thing about Skyrim's story being really basic. I just like more of the way its tone and conflicts fit in that world. None of this really matters though, because I don't play these games for their main quests. Instead, I play them for their engaging optional quest lines. In that regard, Oblivion is pretty good. A lot of the guild quest lines here are solid, particularly the Mages Guild and the Thieves Guild quest lines, which are a lot more fleshed out than I remember them being in Skyrim. In addition, the smaller one-off side quests in Oblivion are also pretty well done, usually having some sort of wacky twist or interesting decision that you must make at the end. This is definitely the area of the game where that signature Bethesda charm really shows up, with a lot of little, memorable stories that you get to experience. I really have no problem with the contents of these side quests. My issue lies more so within the dialogue. I never remembered Skyrim being very good at NPC conversations, but after going back to compare it to Oblivion, it's almost night and day. In both games, you have the ability to talk to every NPC, but in Oblivion, that's really just an illusion. Skyrim's NPCs at least try to appear like real people that all have a few different, relatively interesting things to say.
Visions. I won't repeat them, and I won't allow them to be spread under this roof. Now you go about your business.
Oblivion's NPCs, on the other hand, not only have horrible AI,
like a soiled cloth.
Yes, I can. You are under arrest for the theft of the bust of Lathasa and Doris.
but they also just all usually recycle a few of the same robotic lines of dialogue that aren't even trying to sound like real things people would say.
Apparently some fool tried to resurrect the Crimson Scars in Deep Scorn Hollow.
Apparently, some fool tried to resurrect the Crimson Scars in Deep Scorn Hollow.
Apparently some fool tried to resurrect the Crimson Scars in Deep Scorn Hollow.
Apparently some fool tried to resurrect the Crimson Scars in Deep Scorn Hollow.
Also, there's like 10 voice actors for hundreds of characters, which doesn't match up at all. Most of this really broke my immersion, as I'm someone who tries to talk to every character in these types of games to pick up every quest or all the information I can. So yes, while the quests themselves have interesting stories to tell, the fact that they revolve around such an archaic, robotic dialogue system really hurts them for me. Also, I've already hated on Oblivion's RPG mechanics enough, so I may as well add to that by saying I despise the reputation system here. I'm not sure if it's because the NPCs are so robotic, but the fact that some of them won't let you proceed with certain quests because you don't have a good enough quote-unquote relationship with them is just so stupid. This gives you no option but to either waste your gold bribing them within a little menu screen, or find a charm spell to use on them. The system really just adds absolutely nothing to the experience and is an unnecessary annoyance that further broke my immersion. It's the little stuff like this that Skyrim didn't have that makes Oblivion so much more frustrating to play through for me. I get that the game is pretty old, so it's unreasonable to really expect some amazing dialogue system or great NPC AI, but I'm just trying to unpack why I personally didn't enjoy this game as much as I was expecting. It's a shame because I think the actual contents of Oblivion's questlines are pretty interesting. They just were bogged down for me by a lot of the jank that some people seem to be able to put up with. I know there's a bunch of people out there who love Oblivion for its heavier RPG elements and the little janky things that give it a sense of charm. If that's you, just realize I'm not denying that I'm a so-called sky baby. I love Skyrim for its incredible world and atmosphere and the freedom it gives you to engage with its many quest lines. But after playing Oblivion, I realized that Skyrim is incredibly bare bones in its RPG elements and really is more of an open world adventure game rather than a true RPG. I think if I had played Oblivion first and gotten used to its more dated aspects before being exposed to Skyrim's streamlined nature, I would have enjoyed it much more. Because that's the thing, Oblivion has all of what made Skyrim so special to me. It has the magical atmosphere and the memorable quest lines, yet unfortunately, these things are dampened by some of the dated elements of its gameplay systems and world that make the game feel like a slog at times. I want to emphasize that I liked much of my time with Oblivion, just not nearly as much as I thought I would. I kept waiting and waiting to be graced by the second coming of Skyrim, yet that never happened. That's why I say Skyrim ruined Oblivion for me. Not because I hated the game or think it's terrible, but because the expectations Skyrim created for the game set it up to fail for me. It's unfortunate because I think this ruined what could have been a really great experience. My plan is to take a break from Oblivion and approach it again eventually with a fresh mindset, because the reality is, I still want so badly to love this game. Thanks for watching. I know this video is a bit more divisive than what I usually post, but I hope that even if Oblivion is your favorite game ever, you can still respect where I'm coming from here. I love just making videos talking about the games I play in a manner that is both fair, but also honest about how I feel. So if you enjoy stuff like that, consider liking the video and subscribe, even if your opinion on the game is a little different than mine. If not, that's cool too, I guess. Peace.